They said the lab lost a $10 million federal grant. They said it was a failure of oversight. They said my name. I hadn't even opened my mouth when they already decided I was the one to take the fall. My name is Dr. Meredith Lane. I was the compliance director at Novalink's Biotech labs in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I gave them 16 years of my life, days, nights, weekends, every inch of my soul, to protect the integrity of our research. That morning, everything changed. "This is on you, Meredith," said Dr. Spencer Hale, the new director sent from Veltrace Corporation after the merger. His voice was cold and loud enough to slice through the silence of the main conference room. "The Federal Health Board revoked our grant because of compliance failures. Your department." Around the table sat 20 people. Not one looked up. Not one stood up. I stared at the polished surface, saw my own stunned reflection. This wasn't a discussion. This was an ambush. The official letter cited manipulation of chemical logs, protocol violations, and falsified access approvals. He continued, reading from a document as though it were scripture. "The decision is final. Effective immediately, Dr. Lane is relieved of her duties. Security will escort her." They didn't even let me respond. As I walked out, the hum of fluorescent lights felt deafening. My lab coat, still hanging by my office door, seemed like a ghost of my former self. Liam Park, the junior tech I mentored, stood frozen in the hallway, eyes wide.
He didn't know what to say.
No one did. But I wasn't confused. I wasn't disoriented. I was furious. Because I knew something they didn't. I had a ledger. Not a digital file. Not a shared drive. A black, cloth-bound notebook I kept in my desk drawer, documenting every breach, every irregularity, every whispered deviation from standard procedure since the day Veltrace took over. I had dates. I had names. I had proof. Back in my apartment, the notebook lay on my dining table beside a cold mug of tea. I flipped through the pages with shaking hands, reliving the last 6 months. Dr. Kayla Marin's signature on a patient trial that shouldn't have been approved, missing timestamps on chemical logs, data entries done using my login at hours when I was offsite. And then the most chilling piece, security logs showing someone had used my credentials to approve protocol changes at 2 a.m. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just bad management. It was sabotage. They'd forged my name into their lies. I could hear Spencer's voice in my head. The board made its decision. No, I thought. They made a mistake. I wasn't going down for something I didn't do. As the city outside turned orange with evening light, I opened my laptop. If they wanted a war, I was going to give them one. I drafted 2 reports, one to the National Scientific Ethics Council, another to the Laboratory Safety Division under the Office of Public Health. Both outlined what I had found and named those responsible. I attached copies of screenshots, scans from my ledger, timestamps, and flagged communications. It was a risk, but I didn't have much left to lose. My finger hovered over the send button. I took a breath. Then I clicked. The truth was out now. And it was only a matter of time before the silence they built came crashing down. The morning after I sent the reports, Cambridge felt unusually still. I sat at my window with a fresh pot of coffee and stared out over the quiet streets, waiting for the machine to react to the wrench I'd just hurled into its gears. The first email arrived at 8:12 a.m. Subject: Request for clarification. Submitted report. From National Scientific Ethics Council. Then another, 20 minutes later. Subject: Acknowledgement of receipt. Reported violations. From Office of Public Health, Laboratory Safety Division. Both were short, formal, but they confirmed what I needed. I had been heard. My evidence was now in the hands of people who couldn't be ignored. I knew Veltrace wouldn't take long to notice. Sure enough, my phone buzzed just after 9. The caller ID displayed Spencer Hale's personal number. I didn't answer. A second call followed from an unlisted number. Then came the voicemail. Meredith, this is a misunderstanding. I'd appreciate a chance to clarify some things professionally. Professionally? After throwing me to the wolves in front of my colleagues? No, Spencer. The time for professional courtesies had passed. I spent the next hour compiling a more detailed timeline, cross-referencing security footage logs, digital file histories, and my handwritten notes. I hadn't planned to become a whistleblower. I'd just always been meticulous. But now, that habit might be the only thing standing between justice and silence. At 11:03 a.m., I received a message that stopped me cold. From Liam Park. Subject: Are you okay? Inside, a single sentence. They just cleared Kayla's office, hard drives and all, and everyone's acting like they're in a war zone. I hadn't even mentioned Kayla Marin by name in the official reports. But I knew they'd find her soon enough, because she was the first to cut corners, the first to push unauthorized trial adjustments, and likely the first to panic when she realized the trail led right to her. That afternoon, I left my apartment for the first time since the dismissal and drove to the western edge of the city, to a modest home lined with birch trees. It belonged to Dr. Gloria Emmons, the original founder of Novalink's Biotech labs. She had retired 5 years earlier, long before the Veltrace merger. But I needed her. She opened the door wearing a soft gray sweater, her eyes sharp behind gold-rimmed glasses. "I've been expecting you," she said. I didn't ask how. I simply stepped inside. Her living room looked like an academic archive. Scientific journals towered over framed photographs. On one wall hung a plaque for uncompromising integrity in biomedical advancement. It felt like a sanctuary for truth. Over herbal tea, I laid it all out. Every note, every forged entry, every way they had twisted my identity into a shield for their misconduct. She listened, wordless, until I was done. Then she leaned forward and said, "This isn't just about Veltrace. This is about what research becomes when profit chokes out principle." Her words sank in deep. We discussed next steps. She offered to contact colleagues at the Massachusetts Institute of Biomedical Research. "They'll want someone like you," she said, "and you'll need a platform if this goes public." As I was leaving, Gloria handed me a folder filled with archived compliance protocols, evidence that the standards hadn't just shifted, they had been rewritten in silence after the merger. "They erased our foundation," she said, "but you can rebuild it." That evening, I received one more message. From unknown address. Subject: Confidential. Don't trust internal audit. Attached was a single document, a spreadsheet. It contained Veltrace internal memo notes about me, their plan, their timeline, code phrases like controlled separation and contain liability exposure. They hadn't just scapegoated me. They had planned it weeks in advance. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't negligence. It was strategy. I saved the file, encrypted it, and backed up every document onto an external drive. The game had changed. They weren't trying to hide mistakes anymore. They were hiding a machine built on lies. And they thought I was already gone. Let them think it. The quieter I became, the more dangerous I was going to be. By the third day, the silence from Veltrace was louder than any threat. That's how you knew they were nervous. The calls stopped. The emails dried up. And somewhere inside Novalink's executive wing, a damage control team was scrambling behind locked doors. Meanwhile, outside those walls, the cracks were starting to show. At 7:42 a.m., I received a call from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. The voice on the other end was shaky. "Dr. Lane? This is Rachel Lim. I used to work in clinical ops at Novalinks. I got your name from someone who says you're fighting back." She told me she had been let go 2 months ago. Quietly. No announcement, no goodbye lunch. Her only mistake had been flagging inconsistencies in data entries during a pre-trial drug phase. "They said I wasn't a team player," she whispered. "I think you were the target they planned after me failed." I asked her to send everything she had. She agreed, but only after I promised she'd remain anonymous for now. By noon, the first media leak hit. Independent whistleblower alleges major research violations at Novalink's Biotech. It appeared on a science ethics blog, not a major outlet, but enough to cause a ripple. The article quoted an anonymous former compliance officer describing widespread manipulation of trial data and chemical safety violations. The post cited sources in both regulatory offices, confirming investigations had begun. Less than an hour later, I received a text from Liam. They just shut down the third floor. No one allowed in or out. By the end of the day, Novalinx's website was temporarily offline for maintenance. Their press contact email bounced back as undeliverable. That night, Gloria called. "I've spoken with some friends at the Ethics Council," she said. "They want to fast-track an inquiry panel. They'll need someone to present your findings. In person." My pulse quickened. "I'll do it." I spent the next 2 days assembling a master file. It included my ledger, the internal memo leak, Rachel's documentation, and a growing archive of files Liam had been quietly uploading to a private drive. Protocol documents rewritten without approval. Chemical logs cleared with no chain of custody. Emails where Kayla Marin referred to adjusting expectations to meet deadlines. She had been in deep. And she wasn't alone. On the 5th day, as I printed out the final report in my apartment, someone buzzed my intercom. "Delivery," a voice said. I hadn't ordered anything. Cautiously, I went downstairs. A plain white envelope had been left under the lobby door. No return address. No name. Inside were 2 photographs and a flash drive. The photographs showed Dr. Spencer Hale and a Veltrace executive meeting in a private lounge. One image captured a laptop screen behind them, partially open, displaying what looked like a financial dashboard. One of the charts was labeled Trial Forecasting Risk Buffer, MLANE. My initials. Next to a dollar amount. The flash drive contained surveillance footage. It had a timestamp. It showed someone, face obscured under a lab hood, logging into the Novalinx server system after hours. The login name flashed on the screen for just a moment. m.lane_admin7. My credentials. My name. Used in the dark to validate research that never happened. Whoever sent this had access to things I didn't. Possibly someone inside. Possibly someone trying to clear their own conscience before the fallout. Either way, they had just given me the proof no one could ignore. The time for quiet moves was over. I booked a train ticket to Washington, D.C. The Ethics Council had scheduled their emergency panel for Friday morning. I packed 2 bags. One with clothes. One with everything that could bring Novalinx and Veltrace to their knees. The train pulled into Union Station just after dawn. The sky over Washington, D.C. was silver with clouds, and a sharp wind chased pedestrians between federal buildings. I stepped off the platform with my messenger bag slung over one shoulder, containing a binder thick enough to collapse a shelf and a flash drive encrypted 3 times over. This wasn't just evidence. It was the truth carved in data. The Ethics Oversight Council had reserved a hearing room inside a modest glass building near the National Mall. Not a courtroom, not a stage. Just a circle of long desks, 10 stern chairs, and enough pressure in the air to make my spine straighten. Dr. Gloria Emmons met me at the front steps. Her expression was calm, but her grip was firm when she shook my hand. "I'll be behind you," she said. "But they need to hear it from you first." Inside, I was greeted by a woman in a dark blue blazer who introduced herself as Elise Farrow, the council chair. She reviewed the agenda quickly and handed me a name placard. I was no longer Dr. Lane, terminated compliance officer. I was now primary reporting witness. They called the session to order at exactly 9 o'clock. "Dr. Lane," Chair Farrow said, "we've reviewed the written submission and supporting documents. We ask that you walk us through your findings from the beginning. Explain what happened and how you became aware." I stood and placed the flash drive on the table. "It didn't start with a lie," I began. "It started with a silence." As I spoke, I watched their faces. No reactions at first. Then shifting eyes. Raised brows. A tightening of jaws. I described the pattern of manipulation, the falsified timestamps, the missing approvals, and how my credentials had been used behind my back to authorize unsafe trials. I walked them through the memo that marked me as a financial risk. I showed them the footage of the unauthorized login, the name tag, the trail. When I described the meeting between Spencer Hale and Veltrace executive team, with my name listed on their dashboard like an entry in a ledger, Elise leaned forward. They quantified your liability as a line item? They did, I said, keeping my voice steady. And then they set about removing me. The session went on for 2 hours. I answered every question, showed every chart. Never once did I speak in hypotheticals. I didn't need to. The truth had already happened. Afterward, Gloria joined me outside on a stone bench beneath a line of cherry trees. Their branches were bare, but I imagined what it would look like in spring. I needed that vision of something still growing. They'll act quickly, she said. This isn't a small case anymore. You've exposed something systemic. As we sat in silence, my phone vibrated. It was Liam. Liam Park. Kayla's been suspended. Hale hasn't shown up to the building in 2 days. Everyone's in panic mode. And someone leaked the trial footage to the press. I didn't ask who. Back in Cambridge, Novalinks had turned into a house with no windows, everything sealed tight, lights off, hoping no one would knock. But the knock had already come, and it had echoed. That night, I stayed in a small hotel room near DuPont Circle. The news broke at 7:48 p.m. Federal Review Board launches criminal investigation into Veltrace Labs after whistleblower testimony. There was my name in the subheading. For the first time, not as an accused, but as a source. That moment should have felt like victory. But it didn't. It felt like the eye of a hurricane. Because I knew what came next wasn't relief. It was the real storm: corporate defense teams, legal muscle, smear campaigns, silence buyers. But they were late. The silence had already shattered. And this time, the world was listening. The morning after my testimony, Veltrace stock dropped 11% before noon. News anchors spoke my name as they tried to summarize a story that had taken years to build in silence. Words like data tampering, unauthorized protocols, and internal sabotage began surfacing in headlines across the country. Even major outlets that usually ignored research stories were tuning in. Because this wasn't just about a lab.
It was about a system.
By the end of the day, an emergency shareholder meeting had been called in Veltrace Manhattan headquarters. Meanwhile, in Cambridge, Novalinks executives were frantically deleting LinkedIn pages and avoiding reporters parked outside their offices. I wasn't celebrating. I was bracing. Because the next move was always retaliation. Sure enough, it arrived at 3:17 p.m. A cease and desist letter. 12 pages long. Signed by Veltrace Senior Legal Counsel. Accusations of breach of confidentiality. Misuse of proprietary documentation. Unauthorized disclosure of internal information. I printed it, read it twice, then slid it into a drawer. At 3:42 p.m., a second document arrived. This one came from the Office of Public Health. A formal request for cooperation in a federal investigation. I responded immediately. Full cooperation granted. Then I called Gloria. "They're trying to scare you," she said without hesitation. "It's a show. They won't survive what's coming." Later that evening, Liam sent another update. They just cleared out Hale's office. Boxes, drives, everything. But here's the weird part. Kayla's cooperating. She's in a closed-door meeting with the auditors right now. Kayla Marin. The woman who once looked away when I passed her in the hallway. The one who buried altered trial data under my credentials. I wondered what made her turn. Guilt? Pressure? Or simply the knowledge that everything was unraveling and she didn't want to be the one holding the rope? The next morning I found out. A leaked internal memo surfaced in a reporter's inbox. The signature at the bottom was hers. Asterisk to whom it may concern, I acknowledge that under pressure from Dr. Spencer Hale and Veltrace representatives, I submitted altered data entries for expedited trial phases. I also witnessed compliance credentials being misused without consent. These actions were not mine alone, but I accept responsibility for my role. Asterisk. She had flipped. By noon, federal agents had entered Novalinks' premises. Quietly. Without cameras. Without noise. But everyone knew what that meant. Subpoenas followed. Emails were seized. And one by one, the pillars of a lab that once promised to cure autoimmune disorders began to crumble under their own lies. Meanwhile, I sat in the back row of a classroom at the Massachusetts Institute of Biomedical Research. The dean had invited me to observe the ethics seminar I would soon be teaching. It was surreal, watching students, some no older than interns I used to train, debate clinical transparency without knowing the person behind the biggest ethics scandal in recent history sat 10 feet away. When class ended, the dean approached me quietly. "Dr. Lane," he said, "you have no idea how long we've needed someone like you." I thanked him, but my thoughts were elsewhere. I knew the investigation wasn't done. Not even close. Because the money trail hadn't stopped at Novalinks. And the real puppeteers were still out of view. Until now. That evening, I received a private message from an anonymous source. Check the board filings. Someone moved $3 million out before the crash. Look for the initials R.D. I stared at the message, rereading it. I had never heard that name, but I would. Because whoever R.D. was, they were the next piece in the chain. And I was going to follow it until the very end. I sat at my kitchen table long after midnight, eyes fixed on the glowing screen of my laptop. The message from the anonymous source echoed in my mind like a riddle. Check the board filings. Someone moved $3 million out before the crash. Look for the initials R.D. Initials didn't mean much unless you had access to board rosters and transactional summaries, most of which weren't public. But I remembered something. Months ago, before the grant was revoked, Veltrace had submitted an annual shareholder report. Buried within pages of legal disclaimers and future earnings projections was a section on executive transactions. I found it at 1:46 a.m. A stock movement listed under a secondary holding company, Redridge Diagnostics. The initials matched. A wire transfer, dated 3 weeks before my dismissal, showed a sweeping liquidation of vested stock options tied directly to clinical trial performance. $3 million. The name attached, Ronald Decker. He wasn't in any of the company directories. But a quick search in the SEC filings database linked him to a board advisor position, one that didn't appear in the public leadership bios. This was someone working in the shadows. A backroom handler. The kind of man who didn't speak at meetings but decided who got invited. And he had cashed out just before the collapse began. I saved the documentation, encrypted the files, and emailed a copy to both the Ethics Council and the Office of Public Health with a brief note. Additional entity discovered. Likely financial beneficiary of falsified trial performance data. May have direct knowledge of manipulated protocols. By sunrise, I received confirmation. The investigation scope had widened. Ronald Decker was now officially a person of interest. At the university, I continued preparing for my upcoming course, Research Integrity in the Modern Era. Every time I looked at my syllabus, I thought about how surreal it was. A few months ago, I was being marched out of Novalinks as if I had poisoned the lab myself. Now I was designing curriculum modules on the very betrayal I had survived. Then came the call I hadn't expected. It was from Nathan Grayson, chairman of the Novalinks board. His voice was quiet, strained. "Dr. Lane, I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but we need your help." I let the silence hold before answering. "You buried me without asking for the truth. Now you want my advice." "I understand," he said quickly. "And you're right. But we're rebuilding. We've terminated Hale. We've severed ties with Veltrace. And the new leadership believes the only way forward is full transparency. We're asking if you'd consider consulting on protocol reconstruction." I thought about the lab, the people still inside, the ones who hadn't known or hadn't dared speak. People like Liam. "Send me the proposal," I said. "I won't commit to anything without reading it." He agreed. Later that evening, I walked along the Charles River, my coat pulled tight against the wind. I passed students studying beneath lamplight, boats drifting near the docks, life carrying on as if science hadn't nearly been sold for profit just a few miles away. I checked my phone. A message from Liam. "Liam Park, Kayla's out. Officially. But get this, she's agreed to testify. Against Hale." And she gave them a list. Names. Dates. Everything. Everything. This was it. With Kayla's testimony, my documentation, and Decker's financial trail, the noose had closed. Now the only question was whether Hale would go down quietly or drag others with him. And I had a feeling I knew which one it would be. The subpoena for Dr. Spencer Hale arrived on a Friday morning. According to the legal reports, he was found at a private estate in Vermont, attempting to leave the country under the guise of an academic retreat. His arrest didn't make the evening news yet, but within the tight corridors of the scientific world, word traveled like wildfire. The once proud director of Novalinx was now a suspect in a growing criminal investigation, charged with data falsification, obstruction, and financial fraud tied to multiple research trials. But Hale wasn't just guilty. He was angry. 2 days later, I received an encrypted message from a federal liaison. The email contained an audio transcript from an initial interrogation session. Hale had already begun naming names. He claimed he was following orders from above, that Veltrace executives had applied pressure to falsify results in order to expedite drug releases for stockholder gains. He claimed the board knew. He claimed Ronald Decker was the one who provided the risk assessment reports that marked me for removal. And in the middle of it all, he dropped a name I hadn't expected to hear. Dr. Charles Delling, a clinical strategist I had once worked with during my first 5 years at Novalinx. I remembered him as brilliant, methodical, and cautious. But now, his name was tied to an internal communication uncovered in the investigation. He had reviewed trial adjustments submitted by Kayla Marin and approved them with a handwritten note. Asterisk fast track viable. Lane will push back. Secure override. Asterisk. It wasn't just that they had overridden me. It was that they knew I would stand in the way and built a plan around removing me before the protocol went through. For every lie they told, they made sure I wasn't there to stop it. I closed the file and leaned back in my chair, the weight of it pressing hard across my shoulders. The next morning, I met with the university's legal team. My course launch was approaching, and the institution wanted to ensure their association with me didn't put them at risk. Quite the opposite, the dean said firmly. Your story is the reason this course matters. We're behind you. Later that afternoon, Gloria invited me to speak at a closed symposium of research ethics leaders from around the country. My keynote would focus on system accountability, the invisible architecture that allows people like Hale and Decker to thrive.
But I had one more stop to make before then.
Novalinx Labs. I hadn't returned since the day I was fired. The building looked the same. Modern glass. Brushed steel. A logo still clinging to relevance. Inside, a new receptionist greeted me. The nameplate on the desk read Aisha. I have a visitor's pass for Dr. Lane, she said with a warm smile. They're expecting you upstairs. I rode the elevator to the 3rd floor, the floor once blocked off, where Liam had said the chaos began. The conference room had been transformed. Gone were the sharp blue hues of Veltrace branding. The walls were repainted, the company values reframed. A whiteboard stood in the corner with hand-scribbled notes about transparency protocols and chain of custody reforms. Nathan Grayson entered with 2 other board members. They looked exhausted, but alert. Men and women who had watched their empire crumble and were now, piece by piece, trying to pick up the bricks. We've reviewed your consulting terms, Nathan said after our handshake. And we agree. Full transparency, no interference, and everything implemented under your guidance. I nodded, then set down the thick binder I had brought. Then we begin with the basics, I said. Not safety compliance. Not data validation. We begin with truth. As I walked them through the outline, I noticed a shadow in the doorway. Liam. He raised a hand in greeting. I gave a slight smile. They had silenced me once. Now I was the one holding the pen. And I wasn't done writing this story yet. It started with a phone call from the Congressional Science Oversight Subcommittee. A formal invitation, no, a request for my appearance as a key witness in their upcoming hearing on scientific fraud in public-private research institutions. I stared at the letterhead for a long time after the call ended, the embossed seal catching the morning light from my window. I would be speaking under oath, on record, to the entire country. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday, held inside a towering white building lined with tall, echoing marble columns. The kind of place where decisions are made in whispers and consequences are carved into law. They assigned me a seat near the center of the hearing chamber, directly facing the panel of elected officials. Reporters crowded into the gallery. Cameras pointed from every angle. Microphones lined the long oak desk in front of me, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. "Please state your name and role in the matter under investigation," the chairwoman asked. "My name is Dr. Meredith Lane," I said. I was the former director of compliance at Novalink's Biotech laboratories in Cambridge, Massachusetts. "And what brought you here today?" "I was falsely terminated after being framed for the loss of a major federal grant. That event led me to uncover evidence of systemic scientific fraud, data falsification, protocol violations, and credential misuse within my former organization, actions which were tied directly to financial gain and executive pressure." The next hour unfolded in flashes. The panel asked about my ledger, my evidence, my credentials being used without my knowledge. I described in clear, deliberate terms how the corporate takeover had shifted the lab's values from cautious precision to speed and sales. "And when you first noticed irregularities, what did you do?" "I documented everything," I said. "Because even when no one listens, the facts do." The room fell quiet. Behind me, I felt the presence of others: Gloria, Liam, Rachel Lim, and two new researchers I hadn't met before, seated near the back. People who had reached out to me after hearing the early stories. People who had lost careers, credibility, and confidence in a system they once believed in. Now they were witnesses. Survivors of a culture that silenced integrity to worship results. After my testimony, I was asked to remain while others spoke. One by one, familiar names filled the room. Kayla Marin, now cooperating fully, detailed how Hale had directed her actions. Even she looked humbled, almost broken. Then came Ronald Decker. Escorted by federal agents, his suit immaculate, his face expressionless. When asked about his role in the liquidation of stock options weeks before the trial data was exposed, he remained silent. He invoked his right to avoid self-incrimination. The media coverage was instant. Whistleblower unveils national lab fraud. Congress hears explosive testimony on data manipulation in pharma trials. Veltrace executives under federal scrutiny after public hearings. That night, I returned to my hotel room and turned on the news, not to watch myself, but to see if the conversation had changed. And it had. Ethics panels. Oversight proposals. Calls for new federal frameworks to protect lab workers and whistleblowers. The words I had longed to hear for years were now printed on the bottom of the screen like they had always belonged there. And yet, I didn't feel triumph. I felt responsibility. Because changing the law doesn't change the culture, not unless someone stays to rebuild what was torn down. That's when I opened the draft of my ethics curriculum again. I added a new final unit. Preventing the pattern, what happens after the whistle. The next morning, I received a call from the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Biomedical Research. "Dr. Lane," he said, "your voice has become part of the national dialogue. We'd like to formally offer you a full-time role, departmental lead on integrity reform and oversight education. This would be a new division built around your model." I accepted, because that was the only way to finish what I had started. Not by watching the walls fall, but by helping lay the bricks that would replace them. 3 months after the congressional hearing, I returned to the Novalink's facility, not in shame, not under escort, but as a consultant with full authority to dismantle the very systems that once betrayed me. The building had changed. The gleaming Veltrace plaques were gone, the lobby freshly painted, and the internal security checkpoints now included biometric scans, no longer tied to a single administrator's credentials. The staff greeted me with a quiet kind of reverence, unsure if I was a symbol of justice or a reminder of their silence. I didn't hold it against them. Fear had once kept them quiet. Now truth would keep them honest. Liam met me at the second-floor lab suite, clipboard in hand. "You should see the changes," he said. "They've implemented everything from your proposal. Triple verified log entries. Multi-party approvals. Anonymous internal reporting lines." "And the team?" I asked.
He paused. Smaller.
but solid. We lost a few who chose to leave rather than be audited. Others were let go. Good, I thought. Cleaning a wound meant removing the rot. That afternoon, I walked the halls alone, stopping outside what used to be my office. A new nameplate hung on the door, someone I hadn't met yet. Inside, I glimpsed neat stacks of documentation, a calming aloe plant on the windowsill, and pinned to the board above the desk, a copy of the Novalink's credo. Asterisk data is sacred. Process is protection. Truth is the cure. Asterisk. My handwriting. It was from the old poster I had scrawled notes on years ago. Someone had saved it. Upstairs, Nathan Grayson joined me in the executive conference room. You were right, he said. We had no safeguards. We trusted the wrong people. And we almost lost everything. You still might, I said plainly. Redemption is a process, not a press release. He didn't flinch. That's why we want you to stay on long term. Help us rebuild our partnerships. Oversee our new compliance office. I considered it. A part of me wanted to say yes, to finish what I started. But another part knew my story wasn't just about this one lab. There's a new generation coming, I told him. They need to know what happened here, and how to keep it from happening again. I thanked him for the offer. Then I left. Back at the university, my course launched to a packed lecture hall. Students, researchers, visiting scientists, they all came not for answers, but for tools. The final session ended with a standing ovation. I wasn't used to applause. I had spent too long being whispered about. After the room cleared, Liam found me backstage. Dr. Lane, sorry, Professor Lane, I got the fellowship. The one at Johns Hopkins? I asked. He nodded. They said your letter carried more weight than anything else. You earned it, I said. He hesitated, then added, we still talk about you at the lab, you know. The new hires, most of them don't even know the full story. But they know the rule. What rule? He smiled. Always keep a ledger. That night, alone in my apartment, I lit a candle and pulled out the old notebook. The black cloth cover was worn. Its pages filled. Every line a memory. Every word a piece of the road I had walked. I placed it on a new shelf beside an empty one. For the next notebook. Because the truth doesn't stop with one story. And neither would I. The first print copy of the academic journal slid through my mail slot just after sunrise. I picked it up with cautious hands, scanning the embossed title across the matte black cover. Ethics in Emerging Biomedicine, the Lane Doctrine. The article I had written was never meant to be a declaration. It was a map of what to do when silence becomes institutional, when systems fail, and when you are left standing alone between what is right and what is convenient. Inside, under my name, the title read, The Fragility of Truth in the Age of Corporate Research. It was already being cited across policy circles, invited into curriculum guides, and requested by medical research institutions worldwide. But none of that felt as important as what arrived 2 days later. An envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dear Dr. Lane, I am a second-year graduate student at Stanford, and I watched your congressional testimony live. Your words stayed with me, not just the facts, but the courage behind them. I used to think speaking up would cost too much. But now I understand that silence costs more. We had a minor compliance breach in our own lab last week. I was the only one who reported it. I just wanted you to know you made a difference. Asterisk. I read the letter 3 times, then placed it next to the black notebook on my shelf. That night, I attended a formal dinner hosted by the Massachusetts Institute of Biomedical Research. They awarded me a medal I never expected to wear, the Emmons Award for Scientific Integrity and Public Trust. Gloria presented it herself. It is easy, she said to the crowd, to publish findings. It is harder to protect the process that makes those findings matter. Meredith Lane did both, and in doing so, she reminded us why science exists at all, not to serve profit, but to serve people. I didn't speak long, just enough to say this. When systems fail, people matter more than policies. The truth needs allies. And integrity, once lost, can only return when someone chooses to be the first voice, never the last. After the applause faded, I stepped outside onto the marble terrace, letting the cool evening wind brush against my face. Down in the courtyard, I saw Liam and several of my students laughing around a table. Their eyes were clear, their curiosity intact. That was the future, right there, unfolding without permission from anyone in a boardroom. Back in my office, I opened a blank notebook, the second ledger. This one wouldn't record violations. It would track victories. Each time a lab adopted new ethics protocols. Each time a researcher reported an anomaly without fear. Each time truth spoke louder than silence. Because for every Spencer Hale, there would be a Meredith Lane. And I would make sure the next one never had to stand alone. The truth, once unearthed, never goes back underground. It grows. It spreads. And it changes everything.